Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Raising the New Earth podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. I know I say very special guest for every guest, but today's guest is really special. Master celebrity trainer, former soccer player, owner of Life Lab, partner of Studeo Gyms in Beverly Hills, family man, nutritionist, breath expert,
Nah.
my beloved David Bannick.
What a great introduction. Thanks for having me. Am I the first man that you've had on the podcast?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are.
Thank you. I'm so honored. That's so cool. Not that I'm competitive at all.
At all.
Bring in that masculine energy. It's good.
That's right.
All right.
So today we want to dive into breath a little bit, and I think both Brooke and I kind of browsed through the Breath book by James Nestor. It's called The New Science of a Lost Art, and in his book he wrote, "No matter what you eat, how much you exercise, how skinny or young or strong you are, none of it matters if you're not breathing properly." And he also mentions that we breathe about 25,000 times a day, and yet he claims that we still haven't mastered this art of breathing. So, Dave, what is your take to Nestor's statement? Do you agree with it?
Uh, yeah, by and large, I do. I love the book. I think it's a great book. I do recommend it because it gives you a real broad spectrum of different breathwork exercises and studies and all sorts of things that are out there. Sorry, we've got sirens outside. But at any rate, I think he's right. When I go through and start to help somebody, either be in better shape or sleep better or something like that, it gets really overwhelming. Vitamins you can take, the way we train, but I find that if you work from a place of breath, right, it will handle a lot of the things that cascade down. So if you swim far enough upstream, we get to breathing and we get to sleep. And so I'll look at these two issues specifically because sometimes if somebody doesn't sleep well, it's because they're not breathing well, right? And so once we start to get some mastery, and that's what I'm going to try to achieve today in a really short time because it's a big topic. As simple as it is, and everybody does it, it's a big topic to tackle. So I think that if we can give people a few tools to help them breathe better, at least get on the track to breathing better, then sleep comes better, right? Anxiety levels go down, depression can go down, our recovery goes up, right? And then we can start to manage our things like our high blood pressure, and we can start to bring, there's just, going through the books, you'll realize that there's just this whole long, kind of inexhaustive list of benefits to breathing properly. And the converse is also true. So when somebody's breathing is really poor, it's shallow, it's all mouth breathing, then we're going to see core body temperature rise, blood pressure rise, we're going to see heart rate rise, right? So anyway, that's that. So it's a long way of saying, yes, I completely kind of agree with his angle. And most of the studies will indicate that he's kind of spot on with this.
So, would you say that when we're babies, because I'm trying to peel off some of the layers of this statement, because when we are born, we breathe. No one teaches us how to breathe, right? We breathe in the uterus, through the placenta. We have everything we need. So how come we have forgotten, and now we need to learn how to breathe if this is innate in us?
Yeah, that's a great question because yeah, it's part of our autonomic nervous system, right? We don't have to say
Right.
inhale, exhale. Like we don't
Right.
have to do that to blink, and we don't have to do that to make our hearts beat, right? So through life, through our habits, we're breathing, I think you said 25,000 times a day, right? We're not really thinking about it. When we get used to going, this sigh kind of breathing, right? It triggers our brain to go, oh, that's the way we do it. That's the way we do it. And so it's just by repetition, right? So a lot of mouth breathers, right? I see a lot of them in the athletic world, believe it or not, because when we're kids and we start running around and we're playing soccer or something like that, the easiest way to get oxygen in is to breathe through the mouth. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but all of a sudden now when we're not on the soccer field or we're not running or we're not hiking or we're not doing something like that, we just automatically go to default. That default has become what we were doing in sport, and that's not the way that we should be breathing, like in our, like right now, right? So in short, almost all the data would indicate we need to breathe through our noses as much as we can, right? I should say as often as we can. And we should actually breathe less. We're a culture of over breathers, right? Now, there's a time where we can use over breathing or hyperventilative breathing in order to benefit our health, right? But it's kind of like, okay, well, we can go on a jog to benefit our health, or we can go on a jog to destroy us. It depends on how far we take it, how fast we take it, how long we keep running, right? So it's really just a matter of dose and how we apply these tools for breathing. So the first thing that I would impress upon people is to breathe through the nose, right? I already discussed that. Everything you can, right? If you're not talking, you're breathing through the nose. And that includes during exercise. And so when we get into exercise, holding on to nose breathing as long as we can will pay dividends in the end. It's a little bit tricky, and our brain needs to be kind of reprogrammed. And that's one of the things that I would like to cover today is how do we do that? How do we reprogram our brain? It's not particularly comfortable to do it, right? But as we know in life, a lot of things that are uncomfortable are actually good for us, right? It's good to be uncomfortable sometimes, and this is certainly one of those times.
Yeah, especially when you get to the cold plunge and you get really uncomfortable. I'm like, no, I'm out.
I'm
good.
Still waiting for you to join me. Still waiting for you to join me.
I'm good.
We've talked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love because you mentioned that, like, nose breathing is essentially like you want to do that as much as possible. Besides, when you're talking, you should be nose breathing. And I did not appreciate that until we went through Journey of Intrinsic Health and really understanding that they actually even suggested taping, your mouth shut at night, because that's a time when we're often, we don't know what we're doing, and we're often breathing through our mouth. And there's so many cascade of health effects that happen with that. But as far as like tools of manipulating your breath and like you talking about like the uncomfortableness that will come, but the benefits that come, what would you say like are your tools or methods, like that, those key pieces there that we should be doing?
Okay, I want to get into that, and we're going to cover something that we call the VOLT test, which is the body oxygen level test, right? Which I learned through XPT. So I'm an XPT performance breath coach. And XPT is a company that was owned by Laird Hamilton. So he's a renowned big wave surfer, athlete extreme, and that may not on the surface level resonate with a lot of people when we start to get extreme. However, we all need to breathe, and sometimes athletes, and that's the way that I certainly view the world, cast a really sharp and focused lens on ways that everybody can benefit, right? Because there are extremes involved in it, we can just knock it down a few notches and see if it's still applicable, and it almost always is, right? And so, I have 80-year-old asthmatic clients, right, who we do breath work every single day, right? And then I still have them training and doing other things that benefit them. And I'll get back to your question, but let me answer why. Why do we do that through the nose? When we do this, when we're exhaling through the nose, inhaling and exhaling through the nose, first of all, when we're inhaling through the nose, it's warming up the air before it gets to our lungs, right? There's benefits to that. And in our nasal passages, it has to go through this labyrinth of a filter in order to filter the air that we're taking in, right? When we're sometimes I'll call it dragon breathing, right? I do a lot of it because I'm a cyclist and an endurance athlete now. So I spend a lot of time going mouth breathing just to get everything in and everything out. There's no filter. It's going right into the lungs, right out of the lungs. You're taking in everything in its path, right? Including bugs. That happens from time to time, right? When I'm on the trails, right? So that's why we want to go through the nose. Now, exhaling through the nose, it's a little bit slower than the mouth. Everything is a little bit slower. And while we're exhaling through the nose, right? It changes our blood chemistry a little bit. Nitric oxide is created up in the nose cavity, right? When that nitric oxide, that NO level reaches a certain point, the brain goes to work and says, now I've got to open up the capillaries and the arteries and allow more blood flow. When we allow more blood to flow, then our body starts that dance it does with carbon dioxide and with oxygen starts to take place, and the body starts to offload carbon dioxide more efficiently, and it starts to reload oxygen onto those red blood cells more efficiently. And that's a tremendous benefit to anybody, whether you're exercising or whether you're just breathing, right? So this is why it's important, right? It's a natural way of our body reaching a homeostasis that aids in recovery and sleep quality, right? So that's why it becomes very, very important to breathe through the nose. So that said, now we're going to dive in. We're going to circle back to your questions. So this bolt test, I'm going to have you guys do it with me, right? And so right now, I just want you to start breathing. We're going to start it right now. We're going to start. I want you to have your phones handy because we're going to need a stopwatch. We're just going to get comfortable. And I think, while I'm remembering this, anybody who's listening to this, please only do this when you're seated comfortably or you're lying down on the floor. Let's not do it while you're listening to this incredible podcast in your car, okay, or operating heavy machinery or anything like that. So stay close to the ground, stay comfortable, right, just in case we get lightheaded or something like that. And that's part of it, right? That's part of it. So in this bolt test, I just want you to breathe through your nose right now, as little as you need to, but as much as possible, right? So just normal breaths, and you're going to listen to my directions, and then at the end I want you to, as soon as I prompt you to, I'm going to have you go to your phone, open up your stopwatch. Go ahead and open that now. Open up your stopwatch feature on your phones, right? Have that ready. You might have a lap tab and you might have a start tab right there. And when I tell you to, when I prompt you to, you're going to hit the start, right? But only when I prompt you to. So I just want us to breathe normally while you're listening to me for maybe 2 minutes, right? We're probably about a minute into this. So we're going to do it for another minute. And every once in a while, you might want to take a slightly larger breath and and match that on the exhale. Nothing fancy. Don't get too lightheaded yet. This is trying to mimic a natural breathing pattern. If it feels funny to breathe like this through your nose, it's because we spend more time mouth breathing than we'd like to think, right? So just try to make it as natural as you can. So when I prompt you to, what we're going to do, not yet, but what we're going to do is you're going to, on a natural exhale, the same exhale as you're enjoying right now, on that natural exhale, you're going to do an exhale hold. Not on the in. We typically go and we hold up here. We're not. We're just going to exhale and we're going to hold. There's still going to be some air in the tank. I don't want you to empty the tank on this drill. Right? Just a natural exhale and a natural hold. The second you start that hold, I want you to hit your stopwatch. Right? And that timer, I want you to hold that exhale breath hold until you feel a strong air hunger, we call it. I've got to breathe, right? But not so big that your rescue breath, that first breath is this guy, like you've been underwater for a long time. You want to try to catch it with your nose. And then that first couple breaths isn't going to be that comfortable, but I want you to hold on to, it may sound like this. Keep some Kleenex handy, right? It may sound like that. That's okay. That's okay if it sounds like that, but hold on to it with the nose. And as soon as you take that rescue breath, you're going to hit the stop. And you're going to see what your timing is, how long you had that exhale retention. And that's going to be your bolt score. And then I'll go into what that is. Okay, a couple more breaths here. Natural breaths, and just stay loose. Okay, on your next natural exhale, do an exhale hold and hit your stopwatch. And just relax. Relax your chest, relax your shoulders, and you can stop the stopwatch as soon as you need to take your rescue breath. And you're catching that breath with your nose. As soon as you have it, you can you can resume breathing through your nose just naturally. You can kind of give me a little wave once you've reached your number. Great. And you can write down or remember what your number is. Brooke
Did
is
you reach
breathing
your
naturally.
number, Brooke?
Good. Breathing
I
through the
reached my
nose.
number.
Catch it with your nose. Okay. All right. Now we're going to talk for just a second. No, Dory, what was your number?
3627, barely.
36 is good. And Brooke, what was your number?
Well, I have to admit that my cell phone is completely out of batteries beside me, I noticed.
Okay.
So I tried to count while I was doing it, which I don't know if that, I'm going to say maybe that affected why I didn't hold it as long as Noah.
No, well, I was watching. So like if you were close to, I had mine the same time I believe you hit yours. What do you think yours was?
I think around like 16, 17, 18 maybe.
I had you at 22.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So I had you at 22.
Okay.
So let's work off of 22 and I'll tell you why. So in this, anybody that would have this is your Bolt score right now. So Brooke, yours is going to be 22. Noah, yours is going to be 36. All right. So the Bolt doesn't tell us everything. It doesn't tell us necessarily how great a shape that we're in. It doesn't tell us whether or not we're endurance athletes. Some top endurance athletes will have a low Bolt score because their breathing is so bad and so inefficient that once they start to reprogram their brain, then their performance goes through the roof, right? And it's quite amazing. So it doesn't tell us everything, but it moves us on the path the right way, right? So anybody that would have a Bolt score of 10 or less, we would think is kind of poor, right? There's some breathing issues going on there. 20 to 10, room for improvement, right? 20 and over is pretty normal, right? That's where that's a really good spot to be. 20 and above. 30 and above is very good, and 40 is where we would see a lot of pretty well-trained endurance athletes, those that have a Bolt score of 40 or above, right? And we would typically see, assuming that they're employing proper breath work and while they're actually doing their exercise and activity, we've kind of, from that point, we can kind of assume, okay, this is probably a human being that has a pretty low resting heart rate, pretty good recovery skills, all that stuff, right? So both of those numbers are very good. So really what we want to look at is we want to look at 20 and above. Brooke, yours was at least 22. I'm not just saying that because I was watching, I was trying to hit my watch at the same time, and then I had you around 25 by the time you waved. So it might have been a little higher than that, depending on what that lapse of time was. Okay, so that's the Bolt score. Now, how do we improve our Bolt score, right? And why is it important to improve our Bolt score? It's important to improve our Bolt score because remember how I said that the brain is programmed from, when Noah asked a really good question, why is it important to learn how to breathe? From decades of life that we've had breathing naturally without any work. So our brain has this, if somebody has a low Bolt score, it's because when the CO2 levels are detected in the brain, right? The CO2 levels, the heightened CO2 levels in the brain are what make they're like emergency alert system. There's high CO2, you need to breathe, right? So all of a sudden now, somebody is really out of breath going up 6 or 7 stairs. It's because they would have their brain is so sensitive to elevated CO2 that they're out of breath, right? But if you were to put them on a pulse oximeter, like simple pulse oximeter like this, right, you would see that their body is fully oxygenated. So their body's fully oxygenated, yet their brain is so sensitive to CO2, or maybe a 1-point drop in oxygen, that their brain goes crazy, right? That their brain goes crazy. So we want to reprogram that so that the body gets used to heightened levels of CO2. Okay. And so go ahead.
So real quick, so does that essentially mean that it's more like some neurological thing happening than actual physical? Okay.
Yes. So really what we're doing here, it is, right? Because the brain is that sensor. The brain plays that role in our sensor. And that greatly affects what our physical output is. But it also affects, and I think this is an important notation, it also affects our blood pressure and our heart rate. So what happens, right? What happens, and maybe at the end of the Bolt test, you felt that hunger to breathe where you're like, there's a certain level of anxiety that goes along with that because that CO2 is up. So imagine if you had a Bolt that was really, really low and that it didn't take much to send that warning signal up to the brain. Imagine that. You would have a potentially, and most probably, a client that has a higher natural resting heart rate, right? Where it might be, even if they're young, it might be in their 80s or their 90s, or they might be quite deconditioned. And they might have an elevated, and most likely would have elevated blood pressure, right? And they most certainly would be agitated, possibly, and I always use the term carefully, but agitation or anxiety goes along with some of this, right? So when we hear the word, God, you just got to calm down and breathe, what we really should be saying is exhale. Really offload CO2. I say it to my clients all the time. You need to offload some CO2, right? Exhale. We have no problem breathing. You're breathing hard. I can hear you breathing. I can see you breathing. You need to let it go. You need to exhale. Slow everything down. Okay, slow everything down. So we're going to go back to this Bolt test in a few minutes, and we're going to take it again, although you both did really, really well, right? We're going to go back to that Bolt test. I could keep going on and on.
Is the Bolt test one of the modalities that you use with your clients? What would be like a specific breath work that you work with your clients?
Cool. So I'm going to integrate this with something which I think is very beneficial. So I've got a couple of there's a countless number of exercises that we can do through our breathing, and I'm going to give some of my clients' favorite ones, right, and ones that I think most people can benefit greatly from. So we can go into something that James Nestor refers to, in his book as the perfect breath, right, which I think is very, very interesting. And the perfect breath. Have you heard of the perfect breath?
No.
No. Okay. So perfect breath has been deemed to be a 5.5. This is kind of interesting numbers if I can get these right. 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out. Right. So if we take an inhale for 5.5 seconds and an exhale through the nose again, everything through the nose, 5.5 seconds, that gives us how many breaths in 1 minute? I'll save you the math because there isn't math in breathing, right? It's 5.5 breaths. So what Nestor compiled, interestingly, is all around the world, these different spiritualities and religions, including Buddhist monks and Kundalini yogis and Native American Indians, and the Japanese have their own, and the Christians through the Rosary have their own, and all of these time out, ironically, to be roughly 5.5 breaths per minute, right? Or 5.5 second sentences, intervals, or chants. So some, sports physio doctors, ones I think Richard Brown, took a deep dive into this and started to see what, if there was anything to this 5.5 second hold from a physiological standpoint, taking out the religiosity, taking out the spirituality, the meditations, and just from a physiological standpoint, going, what are the benefits of a 5.5 in and a 5.5 out, the perfect breath, right? And they were vast, right? So he noticed, most notably for his people, he was dealing with those that were suffering from depression and anxiety. And he noticed a tremendous drop in the client's perceived anxiety and depression once they employed perfect breaths for a period between 5 and 10 minutes a day, every day. That's very little time to start to right that ship. So what I started doing once I got people's Bolt test, and we can put this one to the test too for you guys, right, is I started to incorporate a 5.5 second in, a 5.5 second out, with a 1/2. Here's where the math comes in: a 1/2 your Bolt test. Whatever your Bolt number was, you're going to divide that in half. So Brooke, let's call yours 11, and Noah will call yours 18, and you're going to have that as a hold. So 5 in, 5.5 out, 18-second hold on the down. Noah's got her work cut out for her because that's a pretty big hold on the bottom, right? That's a pretty big hold. So now this is one of those drills, right? So I'm calling this the perfect breath with a half bolt triangle. Now we can also reverse that triangle and do an inhale, half bolt hold, and then 5.5 second exhale, right? So we're training our brain at this point. We're training our brain at this point to get used to these elongated holds. Okay, we're doing that. Okay, so to keep everybody on the same page now, any questions about that so far? I told you I can talk about this a lot. I could talk about this.
I love it. Like, because I read the book Breath a few months ago now, but I was going back and like kind of what I had highlighted, and one of the things was that the religious aspect, or the spiritual aspect of the perfect breath. And I just like I always love when I hear those stories where it's like something that intuitively humans have been doing for really thousands of years, like ancient yogis with the breath, that now we have the science to back it up. And I just always am so fascinated and love that so much when things like we see that
science catches up to something that we've been doing all these years.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes a few pioneers, and if you've heard of Wim Hoff, he's one of those who was so radical, like in some of the things he did. In fact, his Wikipedia page once had him listed as occupation as a daredevil, which is a pretty cool, it's a pretty cool job title if you ask me. But at any rate, it's when enough people start doing it, then science will start paying attention to it and go, okay, because the main question behind the science of it is why does it work, right? And then it's just a matter of them throwing enough money into figuring out, okay, well, why does that work? Well, now we kind of know, right? And anybody who does it, and I do this regularly when I'm with my group riding, I'll hear a rider behind me coughing. The cough is a natural way. It's very common in the endurance cycling world, right? Where you hear the cyclist cough, right? And so what that's the body's natural way of doing what? Offloading the CO2 from the lungs. It's holding on to CO2 in the lungs because the red blood cells are so saturated. Why are they so saturated with? They're so saturated with oxygen that the CO2 can't latch onto them. Right? You're full of oxygen. So now what do you have to do? You have to offload some of that oxygen. You have to offload some of that CO2, right? And the only way to do that is by exhaling, right? So instead of them just going, trying to get the breath in, they got to get the breath out, or they got to pedal harder. And so most of the time what I'll tell them to do is I'll say, like, when we get to an easy transition, is I'll say, Mike, breathe through your nose for a few minutes. It comes into this, right? And within seconds, that cough goes away. And all of a sudden now they've changed. So just a quick little hack like that helps, right? It's like when somebody's in a hyperventilative state, what do? You give them a bag and have them breathe into that bag. What are they doing? They're changing their blood chemistry, right? They've already been hyperventilating. What does that mean? Over oxygenating the blood. Now they have to change that blood chemistry, that balance of oxygen, that dance between oxygen and CO2. And that's the way you do it, right? Have the brain change a little bit, right? And then they catch their breath, and then everything comes back to normal. Okay.
And I see it a lot. I work with adolescents and young adults with food and mood disorders, and so the first thing that I do with them is not necessarily a nutrition assessment, but it's breath work, because there's a lot of chaos and a lot of them are on really, really heavy medications. So my objective is always to get them off those medications so their body can help them release that natural serotonin, release that dopamine. And one of the ways that I do that is through breath work. So I use a little app that's called Breathe, and I just play them for them and they breathe with me. So even through these heavy medications, I ask them, how do you feel? And they say, I don't hear as many voices as I heard before I saw you.
Yeah.
So they already feel calmer. And then from that, we move forward to what do you need help with this week. So I praise breath work. I think it's amazing. Even as an opera singer in New York, I used to see a breath expert, because the
Hmm.
idea was that the higher that you sing, the more breath is going to spin around and you're going to be out of breath really soon. And in order to sing those coloratura, as we call them in the opera world, during an aria, like those, really fast turns, you have to be able to sustain your breath. And so we used to work with a belt around our rib cage, hold it out for as long as we can. Or they used to put books on my stomach when I was laying down, and I was supposed to push the books up and slowly bring them down. So all these things I remember, studying at a, really young age, 20 years old. So I have deep respect, and I do know that it works tremendously.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you just made me think of that too. We talked about, the singing coaches. We want that breath to initiate here, right? It may not be the greatest look on camera, but we want it to start down low.
Fill up like a balloon. Yeah.
Yeah, we want it to start down low, and most of the time, when we have somebody take a deep breath, this is the first thing you see. You're like, okay, take a deep breath through the nose, and I'll still see them go. Right?
Chest, right?
Yeah.
Shoulders, chest.
Everything goes chesty, right? So if we just think about breathing low, allowing the diaphragm to drop, that opens up the lungs, gives us a significant more lung capacity for more breath. Then we can get more oxygen in per breath, take fewer breaths, right? And it becomes more efficient. So that was a good point that you brought up there, right? Okay, so we're gonna put the bolt and the perfect breath to the test. Okay, and I'm going to hold my phone. That's what I was doing here. Is I'm going to split the difference. 22, 16. Sorry, 11, 18. Somewhere in the middle of there is going to be about 15 seconds. We're going to use a 15-second hold because I think you can both do it.
Heck yeah, we can do it. I'm talking about.
If I turn green, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. If I'm on the floor, don't mind me.
Yeah, don't mind me. All right.
Finish the podcast.
It's gonna take us 4 minutes, right? As long as you see 3 pages. Okay. So on this one, I'm gonna hold this so that hopefully you can hold it. And when you hear the bing, right? This is gonna be a 5.5 second in, 5.5 hold. Sorry, 5.5 out, 15 hold. All right. So that we're splitting the difference between your two bolt scores. So we're gonna bring it's half of your bolt scores anyway, right? So and we're going to do that for like 10 or 15 breaths, right? You're going to see how to employ this. 5.5 in, perfect breath in, 5.5 out, 15 on the hold. If you don't get the 15 on the hold, it's okay. Keep trying again. We're going to have several rounds of this, right? In which you're going to have to find that balance of, do I fully inhale so that I can get this? Do I fully exhale? How much do I leave in the tank? You're going to have to negotiate this in order to see how many rounds in a row you can get successfully. Right? Make sense?
Yep, we're ready.
Yep.
All right. Please just give me a thumbs up when you hear the bing. Wait, I got to check on this.
So start our inhale when we hear the bing.
Yeah, I want to make sure it's the right one. Yeah. Can you hear that? Great.
Yeah.
Inhale. Exhale. Hold. That's it. Just relaxing. Relax the belly. Let the belly pop out a little bit. It's okay. It's okay.
It's been popping out since I gave birth to my third child.
There's our inhale. There's our 5.5 out. Hold. Inhale. Exhale. hold. In. X. 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 Hold. In. Final cycle. X. Final hold. Good. Allow your breathing to come back to normal through the nose, of course.
Good job, Brooke.
Nice.
We're in the zone, lady.
Yeah. Well, I realized like when I closed my eyes, it was so much easier for me because I think that like and when we did it the first time when you measured the original score, I had my eyes open and I think that was like contributing to that panicky feeling. And so and maybe it's because I'm so programmed to like when I meditate, I'm closing my eyes off. So it's like I just go into that state, I guess, a little bit easier, but it was incredible. I was like, oh, I just need to close my eyes and it made it just pretty, I wouldn't say effortless, but it was completely doable. Yeah. So
Excellent. I mean, working off of a 15-second hold is pretty advanced, right? So you double that 15, it puts you at 30. A bolt score of 30 and above is very good, right? So that means that's a pretty good spot. So if you're able to link some of those laps together, that's pretty good. This is a combination that I put together that should leave you feeling fairly focused, not overly euphoric, and not like, okay, I'm ready to take a nap. Right? We'll get to that one, right? We can get to, and that's what the area that I call the downshift, right? But that sounded like it landed. Noah, how did that feel for you? You haven't done that one before, I'm sure.
I have done holds for a long time, my opera training days for a very long time. But this one was different because I don't know, it was different. I felt like I need to sneak in a breath towards the last few rounds. Like I can't have that hold be too long.
Yeah, that's okay. No, there's a certain amount, right? And to everybody, it's going to be a little different. There's a certain amount of discomfort that goes along with elongated exhale holds, right? We're more comfortable with the idea of having our lungs full than our lungs almost empty, right? But the exhale hold, in my opinion, is kind of where the magic happens, right? Because that's the part that agitates us the most, right? That's the part that creates the neurological response that benefits us the most in the end, on the backside of it, right? So it's like putting yourself through a HIIT workout or something, right? Nobody really likes it while we're doing it, but we're glad when that 8 minutes or 12 minutes is over, right? We're like, wow, it's a little bit like that. Or the cold plunge, right? A couple minutes in that, and you're like, wow, I'm glad that's done, right? But we're better for it in the end.
And it's amazing to me that we lose, like Brooke wrote in her notes, we lose 12% capacity from the age 30 to 50. And so we are able to stretch our lungs and maintain flexibility of this increased capacity if we do regular breath practices, which some spiritualities do.
The one that I think I'll touch on just a little bit, is, and I mentioned him earlier, is Wim Hoff. And when we talk about bringing in some masculine energy in here, oftentimes when we start talking about Wim Hoff, we're like, okay, you're one of those guys. I guess I kind of am one of those guys, right? But at the same point in time, nobody's done more for research. There's multiple universities, I think 7 of them around the world now, that are doing these massive studies, because through his breath work, which, even though it may seem hyper masculine and jumping in ice water and doing all of that stuff, at the same point, all he's done is and by his own acknowledgement, all he's done is basically remarketed and tweaked breathing practices like Tumo or fire breathing that have been around for thousands of years, right? So this is another version, and his personality was as such that it stuck and it resonated, where certain people would be like, I thought that was all kind of too woo-woo, but now you've got this daredevil who's doing it, who's got world records and got things for swimming under frozen lakes and doing things like that, who has these 8-minute, 10-minute breath holds, and free divers who are employing these techniques for the obvious reasons. And so what I feel, and in Wim Hof studies, for those that may not know, he has shown over and over, not only in his own body, but now thousands of his students and coaches and practitioners, to be able to have breath work that's so powerful with exhale breath holds that it's reversed the effects of things like E. coli, right? So they've actually been injected by E. coli and then been monitored. And there's YouTube videos and all sorts of things like this, where you just see that the students and the practitioners of the Wim Hof technique have very few or very, very minor side effects of being injected by E. coli, where those that were injected with E. coli had the obvious, fever, vomiting, and all the things that would go along with that. That would be a terrible thing to volunteer for. I want to inject me with E. coli, but I'm not going to be part of the breathwork group. I just want to see how this rides out,
Yeah. I think it's important to mention, Dave, I think it's important to mention his backstory, because I think it's really impactful. Once you mentioned his backstory to me, that took me on a different journey, right? I'm no longer looking at just this person who's trying to make a buck, but can you share with us how he got into doing what he's doing?
It's, having taken a number of his classes and heard him speak on this, right, almost tears me up a little bit thinking about it. But many years ago, his wife he's got 2 sons. They've got 2 sons. His wife committed suicide, and he found her, and she'd been battling anxiety and depression. And here he was left, just brokenhearted. This was his soulmate. He's never remarried. This was a couple decades ago this happened. He's never remarried. His sons are now part of his method and his movement. And one day, he lives in northern Poland, and one day he was just like, I can't do this. The bills were mounting up. He missed his wife to the point he could barely get out of bed. He himself was now spun into this depression, but he had hanging over him, my boys need to survive. My boys need to be okay. And he said he put his finances in a way and made sure that they were taken care of insurance wise. You're going, where is this going? And he decided one day that he was going to go down to the river, frozen river, basically, not too far from his house where he lives. And he was just going to get in the water and not get out, as he put it, right? In other words, he was going to just finish his journey, and join his wife. And he knew that his boys would, at that point, I think they were, teens, would be financially taken care of. So he gets in the water, gets in up to here, the water, he ducks under for a second, and his brain goes, this is cold, get out. And then he got his head out of the water, and he stayed in. He said something happened to him in that moment saying, this is the answer. You're going to be okay. And then he stayed in longer, and he started to shiver, and he started to shake. And he got out of the water, right? All those messages saying, get out, get out, get out of the water. And he was overriding those to stay in, but no longer with the idea that he was going to, leave this world, leave this body. So he got out, and he said it was the best he felt in a very, very long time. And he said, okay, I'm going to do this every single day for a year. And he said within 2 weeks, all those thoughts, all of his negative thoughts passed, right? All of his focus, his depression, his anxiety, his weight that was on his shoulders left him. And he said, was it uncomfortable? Yes. He'd wake up in the morning and it was dark and it was 20 degrees and he didn't want to go out and he didn't want to do it, but he knew that was his answer, right? That was his answer. Now, he was already studying yoga and breath work, so he already had some of those tools, right? But now he hit the gas on all of those things, right? To become a master in all of these areas. And so when you go down the path of Wim Hof and you see some of his devotees, there's no shortage of those stories where the power of the breath work, even if you never get into cold water, the power of the breath work is so profound that it's changed their lives. And there's plenty of people that follow Wim that don't get into cold water, that do it for the breathing techniques or for the yoga or do, certain things like that, just for the general wellness of it all, right? But it's pretty fascinating. His story is pretty powerful, right? And there's a lot of those stories within his group. And we just feel better. I mean, we do it with the kids. Hey, we're going to breathe. We put on I put on a Calm app with them sometimes, or a breath work app, and they ask for it, right? They'll come in and they'll see that I have iBreathe on and I'm breathing and I'm doing something like that, and they'll join, right? It might only be for 30 seconds or a minute or whatever it is, whatever their attention span is, but there's a noticeable shift in how they feel, right, by taking charge of their own breathing. Yeah, that's that.
Can you talk a little bit about, as an athlete, like how can you cut the total exertion in half and get huge gains in endurance as an endurance athlete through proper breath work?
Yeah, I touched on that one, and I think there's a bunch of those modalities that work, but breathing as little as you can, but as much as you must, is kind of my mantra on there. Breathe less. I've got enough oxygen. Breathe less, right? And so by working nose breathing as long as you can during physical exercise, and there's 5 levels of this. Maybe I can touch on these. This is through XPT. The first level would be considered nose breathing. That's just what you're both doing right now. I can tell you're just both breathing through your nose because your mouths are closed, right? And so that's just your normal, right? No exertion, not that big of a deal. Level 2 would be a little bit heavier, right? Now you've got to start thinking about it. I'm breathing through my nose, only through my nose. But, you're going to start to get these lines, which look so great on camera, right? We're going to have to start breathing like this and then pushing that air out. Level 3 would be a nose mouth, right? And again, athletically, you're going to see where this goes really fast. And that's where that breathing is going to be more like It may be, right? But that's still a controlled breath, right? The exchange is happening fast, but that's still a controlled breath. Level 4 breathing from an athletic standpoint, we'll say shift. I'll say to my clients, okay, you're on a bike, exercise bike, shifting to level 4. Level 4 is still going to be, it's going to be all mouth, but it's a controlled mouth. So it might sound like this. I do a little hybrid. Of mix, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it should be mouth, right? We can still control it. Level 5 is just the gloves are off, right? We've all been there, right? You're in spin class and it's just, right? And sometimes we can do that for a long time. Our heart rate's going to be up. Everything is going to be up. Everything is going to be elevated, but we're going to get through that. Okay, 1 minute, guys, everything you've got. And you're on the spin class and the mouths are dropped. And that's perfectly okay for this application, right? But as we start to down-regulate, the sooner we can catch it with our nose, the better. Now, how does that pertain to your question? Athletically, when our brains are comfortable with higher levels of CO2 in our system, then we become very, very functional at that blood chemistry exchange between, that happens in our lungs, between that CO2 and O2. So athletes who are going out there, or those who exercise regularly, or I implore you to even try it on your walks, right? I'm going to walk briskly, right? That's where you're at, and that's your favorite form of fitness, which is my favorite form of fitness as well. Just a simple walk, right? Walk a little bit faster, push the pace a little bit, and then just breathing through the nose. And automatically, your brain is going to start to shift and become more and more comfortable with higher levels of CO2 in the system, which means you're going to get those warning signals later, right? Your body, I know what you're doing, right? And you're going to become more efficient. So with endurance and athletes, it becomes about efficiency. How quickly can you recover? How quickly can that exchange? And the hack for that is to slow down your breathing, to get your nose breaths in as quickly as you can, right? So coming off of mouth breathing, it would go, you're breathing like this, to a controlled mouth breathe, to a nose mouth. My favorite, by the way, that level 3. Now I can get it through the nose. Now I'm recovered. Oh, here we go. And again, another hill. Back up the cycle. Back up the cycle. And we can get really efficient at that. So almost every time, guys, for a health hack, while you're in class, while you're trying to keep up with your cardio intervals, that health hack, almost every time when we start to go, okay, get to the nose as quickly as you can, right? People are going to notice a minute, maybe 2 minutes down the line, that it's a term that I use, things open up for them, right? All of a sudden now they've got their breath. If you guys have ever done any amount of running, or any of your listeners have ever done any amount of running, you know that sometimes we go out and it was like, wow, I felt light on my feet. I caught my breath right away. Everything felt good. The endorphins were popping. Dopamine sets in. We feel amazing, right? That runner's high, right? It happens on the bike too. But more often than not, it's torture. For the longest time, we're like, this is so hard. Even if we run every day, when's this going to get easier? Right? That's not a function of luck, right? We can start to replicate that with our breath work, right? So if you can hold back the pace a little bit until you can catch the breaths with your nose and start to work your way up that breathing scale, you're going to be able to find that sweet spot in your spin class, or in your run, or your mountain hike much more efficiently and much more consistently. Consistently is the word that I was looking for.
Yeah.
Okay. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Brooke, did you wanna?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So just to recap that, essentially you want to stay in that level 1 as long as you can, and then go up to level 2, stay there as long as you can.
Yes, as long as you can. Yeah. It's going to take, that part's going to take care of itself, because you're going to be like, your breathing is just naturally going to come up, and that might happen relatively quickly. All of that can happen within seconds, right? Or just a couple of breaths. Yeah, just a couple of breaths. Yeah, but try to get to the nose as quickly as you can. That's my main cue.
Like
Get to-
once you're
keep-
at that peak, then coming
keep the
down back
nose
to
as-
the nose.
Keep the nose as long as you can, right? Keep the nose as long as you can. It'll also, if you're working with even level 3, controlled, even if it's faster, level 3, that's going to keep you, most people, in a heart rate zone that's a level 2, which is not, interestingly, is also kind of optimum for fat burning and fat utilization. So it's not so hard that you're going to be laid out on the floor like a high intensity interval training workout. It's going to be, but it's going to keep you in the kind of that fat burning zone, right? Up to level 3.
Brooke, I want you to
So
share your note about the micro to macro before we wrap up this episode. I really love what you wrote.
Oh, yeah. Well, just so much that we talk about on the podcast is like talking about, as is the micro, so is the macro, and vice versa. And just talking about breathing individually and how it's so important that you have that dance of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and you know that's life is essentially our breath. So is it for the earth itself, and that literally we are suffocating the earth right now. And when you look down to the root of what that is, it's our soil. Our soil cannot breathe, and it's not getting that energy exchange of the oxygen and the carbon dioxide as it needs to. So I just think that, again, it just reconfirms that when you're talking about us, and it's so tied to Mother Nature itself, and that breathing is important in all aspects of that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think it's clearly indicated when we go to some place like the beach, where we have this, these ions popping through the air, or we're in the forest, or we're in the mountains, or we're someplace like this where we're breathing and we feel so good. We feel this energy, we feel this calm, we feel this presence, right? And it's not by chance, right? It's because when we're breathing that air in, specifically in those locations, it shifts us. We become part of the earth, right? We become part of the earth.
And we have these brain waves, right? We normally go in a brainwave of, it's called beta brainwave. This is like the chaos, everything go, 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 go. But when you go into nature, when we go towards the beach, our brainwave actually matches the frequency of the brainwave that's offered, which is a theta brainwave that's more intuitive, more a bit subconscious, but more slow down. So it has been proven, which is fascinating.
Yeah. We're just all one big organism in the great scheme of things on this planet.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I see it. And, and I frequently talk about it. It's like, I don't go into the mountains to ride through them. I go to ride with them. Right. And it's like this dance. You're going to try to take my breath. I'm going to take some of yours. I'm going to try, it's this dance as we go through it. And for me, it's the way that I connect best to the world, I think.
Yeah. And you always say, this is my church. This is my synagogue. I don't need to be in a specific place. This is it.
Yeah. And that's it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes by John Muir, where he says, I'd rather be in the mountains thinking about God than in a church thinking about the mountains. And that's it's a certain sense of, it's a consciousness, isn't it? Yeah. It's a consciousness.
I love that.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts you want to share with us before we wrap it up?
No, just breath work is a really big target, and and so, play with it a little bit. I encourage everybody to play with it a little bit, and, make little micro adjustments, try new breath work exercises. The simple one to explain, as I call it on the downshift, is to take twice as long of an exhale as an inhale, right? So if you do 5 in, do 10 out. If you do 3 in, do 6 out, right? And this will drop the blood pressure down. This will prepare your body to recover, prepare you for sleep, right? So it's really one of those, hey, stressful phone call. Just a couple of those, right? A couple of those changes everything, right? So that's your quick downshift.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, your expertise.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. That was so much fun.
It was so much fun. We're going to have you on again, and because there's so many aspects we can take with the breath. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Sure. Anytime. Anytime.
Yeah.
All right. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. All right.
All right.
Bye.
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 Thank you, Dave.
Bye.
Thank you.